right as we were about to cut our 35th anniversary cake. My husband leaned over and said, "You were never the one. You were just Plan B." The room was full of laughter, clinking glasses, roses everywhere. But in that moment, my world stopped. And then I smiled, because I had a secret too, one that I'd kept for 30 years. And when I shared it, he wasn't the only one who lost everything. My name is Celeste. I'm 58. And this is the night I turned heartbreak into reckoning. If someone called you their backup plan, what would you do? Stay silent or burn it all down? Tell me in the comments. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. Victor and I had been married 35 years. 3 decades of garden parties, charity galas, real estate ventures, and matching smiles. He was Santa Barbara's golden husband, refined, successful, charming. And I was the woman who made his life look complete. I used to teach art at the community college. Now I spend my days in a small ceramic studio near the pier, shaping clay with quiet hands. It's peaceful, safe. But it wasn't always that way. We were standing in the grand ballroom of Villa Elara, the same place he proposed to me at sunset 36 years ago. Back then I thought this view, cliffs, waves, candlelight, meant forever. Now I know it only hides things better. The chandeliers glowed, warm, soft jazz floated through the air, and the scent of white peonies drifted from every corner. Victor had planned everything. He always did. Even the seating chart was symmetrical. And yet I noticed, he didn't look at me once. Not the way a man looks at his wife after 35 years. More like someone playing a role he'd grown tired of. Our son Jasper stood near the bar, nursing a drink and avoiding small talk. He's 34 now, sharp, reserved, always observing, like he's waiting for something to snap. He and Victor never got along. Too many differences, too much silence. Victor once said, "He doesn't take after me, not in the important ways." I never asked what he meant. Maybe because I already knew. I smiled through conversations, let guests hug me, thank them for being part of our journey. But deep inside I was replaying an old scene, one I'd kept buried for 35 years. The night James died. The man I loved before Victor. The man whose child I carried before anyone knew. Victor had appeared like a savior. A man with a strong name, a firm grip, and a promise to make it all okay. Back then, I was 23, pregnant and grieving. My parents adored him. His money meant I wouldn't have to raise my baby alone. So I said yes, and I've lived with that yes ever since. But tonight, as guests raised glasses and praised lasting love, I kept my hands steady because I had something to say. Not just to Victor, but to everyone who believed in the fantasy we'd built. And I knew the exact moment to say it. When the cake was cut, when the illusion was sweetest, that's when the truth would begin. I found him standing alone in the study. The party was in full swing, outside laughter echoing down the marble hallway, champagne flowing like spring water. But Victor, he was still, back turned, shoulders stiff beneath his cream blazer. One hand in his pocket, the other holding something small. I stepped in quietly, barefoot on the rug. It was a photo, framed in gold, old, worn. He didn't notice me at first, just kept staring at her. A woman with dark curls, wide-set eyes, and that kind of smile that didn't ask permission. Isabel. I hadn't seen that picture in years. I thought he threw it away after we married. She was his first love, the one that got away, or so he always said, with a shrug and a drink. But that night he wasn't shrugging. He was remembering. I cleared my throat. He flinched, then slipped the frame back into the drawer like a guilty child caught stealing. "You okay?" I asked, gently stepping closer. His smile came too fast, tight, unnatural. "Just thinking how fast 35 years go." I nodded, but I felt it, the distance, like I was a guest in my own story. Victor wasn't a man given to sentiment. He didn't linger on photos or memories or regrets, unless they meant something. And that photo, it didn't belong in this night. He straightened his cuffs, kissed my cheek, and walked past me. I caught a whiff of his cologne, amber and cedarwood. Familiar, cold. But what chilled me wasn't the scent. It was the look in his eyes. Not guilt, not nostalgia. Longing, as if this entire celebration was for someone else, someone who wasn't there. I stood alone in that room for a long time, hand brushing the drawer handle, heartbeat slow and heavy. And I knew then this night wasn't about us anymore. It was about the woman in the photograph. And the man who never let her go. The sound of muffled voices stopped me on the landing. I was heading upstairs to find my wrap. It always got cold once the sun dipped behind the cliffs. But I paused when I heard Jasper's voice. Low, controlled, a tone he reserved only for his father. "I'm here because of Mom, not for your legacy tour," he said. I moved closer, stopping just before the bend in the hallway. Victor's reply was quieter, but sharper. still blaming me for being what she needed when her fairy tale fell apart. Silence. Then Jasper again clipped and biting. She didn't need you, she had me. I covered my mouth. The air felt colder suddenly, the salt breeze from the balcony slipping under my skin. Victor chuckled. A sound I've always hated. It never held humor, only power. Come on, Jasper. Even your mother knows the truth by now. He paused. I could hear his fingers drumming on the wooden banister. She wasn't my first choice. She was convenient. I froze. Convenient. That word. Like I was a flight connection. A backup plan. Something serviceable until the real thing came back. Jasper must have stiffened because Victor snapped, "Don't look at me like that. Life doesn't always give you Isabel. Sometimes you take what works." My legs wobbled. I backed away before either of them saw me. Downstairs, laughter roared like nothing had happened. But in my chest, everything had shifted. Jasper, for all his resentment, had tried to shield me from his father's disdain for years. Now I knew why. He'd heard this before. And now so had I. The woman who gave up painting for motherhood. Who stayed when it got cold. Who held the family together while Victor flew around selling dreams. I wasn't the love of his life. I was the woman who happened to be standing when his plans collapsed. And in that moment, I realized something else. He still believed I didn't know, but I did. And I'd known more than he ever imagined. That night after the guests left and Victor retreated to his study with a glass of scotch, I went into the old guest room, the one no one uses anymore. It used to be Jasper's childhood room. But in the corner sat an antique dresser that had always been Victor's. He claimed it was too small for suits too sentimental to throw away. But I remembered something else. Years ago, I caught him locking the bottom drawer. And he never locked things without a reason. I knelt down, heart drumming in my ears. My fingers ran across the wood, then underneath the bottom lip. Click. Still there. The old brass key. It slid in with a soft metallic groan. And just like that, the drawer opened. Inside a velvet pouch, a yellowing envelope, and 4 folded letters bound in twine. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Victor's. Back when his penmanship still had emotion in it. I sat on the floor cross-legged. The carpet smelled of cedar and dust. My hands trembled as I opened the first letter. Isabel. It's been 2 weeks since the wedding. Everyone says I should be happy. I married a good woman, sweet, quiet, reliable. She'll make a fine wife on paper. But she's not you. Every night I picture your hair on the pillow. I hear your laugh when she tries to make conversation. It doesn't compare. It never will. Marie? I couldn't breathe. The second letter was dated 6 months later. Still no word from you. I wonder if you even know I married someone else. Or if you care. Celeste's pregnant. They say that should bring joy, but all I feel is stuck. Like I've buried something alive. My stomach turned. The third letter was never sent. Sometimes I dream you'll walk back through that door and tell me to leave her, and I would. I blinked, let that line sit in the air. Not even guilt, just certainty. He would have left me while I was carrying Jasper. The final letter, tucked deepest in the stack, was stained with what looked like water damage, or maybe tears. It's been years now. I've accepted you're not coming back. But sometimes I wonder, if you had, would I have had the courage to walk away? Or would I have done what I always do, stay where it's convenient? I folded the letters carefully, put them back, because I wasn't ready. Not yet. But they confirmed what I had always suspected, not just that Victor didn't love me, but that he never tried. Not even once. I lit a candle in my studio that night. The scent of sandalwood filled the air, mingling with the raw clay on my hands. I couldn't sleep. The letters were still in my purse next to a sealed envelope I hadn't opened in decades. It arrived 3 months after James died, no return address. For years, I told myself it was just an old friend sending condolences. But tonight, I knew better. I peeled the flap slowly. Inside was a single page, typed, no signature. Celeste. James came to see me the night before he died. He said he was scared, not of losing you, but of someone stopping him from getting you back. He told me he was ready to tell your parents everything, that he'd find work, support you, and raise the baby as his. He also said Victor warned him to stay away. He didn't listen. My lungs locked. I remembered the phone call, the officer's flat-toned single-vehicle accident. No witnesses. James had borrowed his boss's car that night. I never knew why he didn't walk, or why he was even near the highway that late. But now pieces clicked. Victor had shown up the next morning, flowers in hand. Told my parents he was deeply sorry and would take care of me. They praised his strength, his timing. I thought it was fate, but maybe it was a plan. I walked over to my shelf, pulled out Jasper's baby photo. He had James's eyes, everyone said so. And now I understood why Victor always looked away. He wasn't raising another man's son. He was hiding the proof. The proof of what he took, of what he may have caused. That night I stayed on the studio floor, wrapped in a wool blanket, heart wide open but colder than it had ever been. Victor thought I was the one who owed him gratitude. He thought silence meant surrender. But I was done being quiet. He had built a life on a grave, and I was ready to unearth it. I stood by the balcony doors watching the waves crash below Villa Ilara. Same sound as the night James died. The wind howled, the tide rose, and I sat in a white dress staring at the man who promised to fix everything. Victor. He wore a black suit, eyes dry at the funeral, held my parents' hands, held mine. But when he looked at James's casket, there was no grief, just calculation. Back then I thought I imagined it. That grief made me paranoid. Now I knew better. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. You need stability now, Celeste. Someone who won't leave again. As if James chose to die, as if Victor wasn't already circling like a hawk. I looked at my reflection in the glass, gray in my hair, clay stains under my nails, laugh lines carved by years of trying to make things work. I had been patient, loyal, silent, but silence had protected the wrong man. And if I stayed quiet tonight, it would make me complicit. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to Jasper, to James, to every version of me I'd buried to keep Victor's world intact. I turned from the window. The ballroom lights glowed downstairs. Guests waited for the cake, for the speeches, for the show. They would get one, but not the one Victor rehearsed. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. I'd spent the night on the studio floor, surrounded by letters, photos, and a life I no longer recognized. Victor was still asleep when I slipped back into the house. I could hear his faint snore through the bedroom door, soft even like a man with nothing to hide. I brewed coffee in silence, the bitter aroma anchoring me. Then I pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write. Not a speech, a confession, not mine but his. I started with the words he whispered to Jasper. She was convenient. Then I wove in the letters, the lines where he begged Isabel to come back, the ones where he said I was paper-thin stability, nothing more. After that, I transcribed the anonymous note about James, word for word. I didn't need drama, I needed truth, something clean, sharp, like glass just before it shatters. By noon, I had scanned every document, labeled each file. Plan B, the real father, Victor's letters, the truth about James. I loaded everything onto a single USB drive, then tucked it into the pocket of the soft blue gown I'd chosen for the party. Victor liked when I wore blue, said it made me look softer. Perfect. I printed one photo of James holding Jasper as a baby. Black and white, high contrast. The only copy I ever kept for myself. That would be the final image. I emailed Jasper just one line. No matter what happens tonight, just stand by me. He didn't reply. But at 3:04 p.m., he heart-reacted the message. That was enough. I greeted guests as they arrived that evening, same as always. Smiled at Victor's business partners. Hugged old neighbors. Listened to stories about the first house we built together, the perfect marriage, the legacy we'd leave behind. I nodded, laughed at the right beats, even kissed Victor on the cheek for photos. He leaned in and whispered, "You're glowing tonight." I turned to him, smiled. "So are you." He didn't catch the irony. Dinner passed. Speeches began. Victor spoke first long, self-congratulatory, performative. He thanked me for 35 years of patience, partnership, and perseverance. Guests wiped tears. He gestured toward me. And now my wife has something to say. Before we cut the cake, I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked slowly to the mic, USB in hand. I took the mic with steady hands. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, casting everything in that soft golden hue Victor always insisted on. He stood beside me, smiling at the crowd, one hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture of possession. The photographer raised her camera. Click, and then I began. 35 years is a long time, I said, voice calm. A lifetime for some, a sentence for others. Laughter. Polite. I smiled back just enough. I met Victor when I was 23, pregnant, alone, grieving a man who was taken from me too soon. The laughter died, but Victor, he was strong, charming, ambitious. He told my parents he'd take care of me, and he did. Victor shifted, just slightly. Together we built a life, a family, a story that looked beautiful from the outside. Pause. But tonight I want to tell you what that story cost. The room went still. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB, held it up like a totem. Everything I'm about to say is documented. Letters, witness accounts, photos, dates. Whispers now. Victor's smile faltered. Because last night my husband reminded me of something. He said I was never his first choice, that I was plan B. Gasps, a chair scraped the floor. Victor turned to me, hissed through clenched teeth. Celeste, not here. I didn't look at him, which got me thinking, what else have I been a placeholder for? I nodded toward Jasper, who sat frozen at the edge of the crowd. He stood, walked slowly to the AV booth, slipped in the USB, clicked play. On screen, white text on black. Truth doesn't expire. The first image, a letter from Victor to Isabel. She'll make a fine wife on paper. The second, Victor's own words about Jasper. She's pregnant. All I feel is stuck. Guests began murmuring. Someone said, "Is this real?" I continued, "There's more. About James, the man I loved before Victor." I pulled a folded envelope from my clutch. "Read." James came to me the night before he died. He said Victor warned him to stay away. Victor lunged forward. "Enough," he snapped. But Jasper moved between us, calm, focused. "You wanted legacy, Dad," he said, voice cold. "You're getting it?" The final image filled the screen. James, holding newborn Jasper in his arms. Black and white, undeniable. The resemblance was chilling. Silence, except for Victor's breath, sudden, shallow. I stepped back from the mic. "My name is Celeste Marlowe, and for 35 years I kept this man's secrets to protect the image he sold all of you." I looked at Jasper, then back at the stunned faces in the crowd. But tonight, I'm reclaiming what's mine. The ballroom fell into a vacuum of silence. No clinking glasses, no fake smiles, no jazz floating in the background. Just breath sharp, uneven, and the sound of truth finally standing on its own. Victor stared at the photo of James and baby Jasper, his face paling by the second. He looked unrecognizable, as if someone had drained the decades of control from his bones. "You think this makes you noble," he barked, voice breaking. I didn't flinch. "This makes me free." He looked at Jasper, then our son, his jaw tight, eyes cold. "You're throwing away everything Victor said." Jasper stepped forward. "I never had anything with you to throw away." Gasps rippled through the room. Victor turned to the guests, now desperate, searching for anyone to support him. "We built this life together." She knew who I was. She accepted it. Murmurs grew. Someone whispered, "Did he really say she was Plan B?" Another, "That's James's son. You can see it." I saw Victor realize what was happening. He was losing the narrative. And Victor Marlowe never lost narratives. Until now. His brother Harold stepped out from the crowd. "Victor," he said quietly, "you lied to all of us." Victor's eyes darted wild now. "I kept this family intact." "You built it on a grave," I answered. He turned to me. "You waited 35 years to do this, out of spite." "No," I said softly. "Out of mercy, and because I finally know, silence doesn't keep things safe. It keeps them sick." Victor surged forward, but Jasper blocked him. "You touch her, I swear." Victor hesitated. For the first time, I saw fear. Not of me, of consequences. "You think the board won't hear about this?" he hissed. "You think clients care about a love story gone stale?" Jasper smiled, reached into his coat, pulled out a manila envelope. I already sent the letters, the full file, to the board, to the press, and to Isabel. Victor staggered. "You didn't?" "I did." The words hit harder than any slap. I stepped forward, voice steady. "Maybe Isabel should know that the man she almost married left someone to die just to build his empire." The projector screen faded to black. Guests began to shift, stand, walk out. Some looked at me with pity, some with awe, but none of them looked at Victor. He tried to speak, stopped, then turned and walked away. No applause, no farewell, just his footsteps echoing against marble tile. The cake stood untouched. I stared at it for a long time. White buttercream, gold trim, perfect sugar roses. It looked beautiful, empty, like our marriage. Someone tried to restart the music. It fizzled, then stopped. No one wanted to celebrate anymore. Hours later, the ballroom was nearly empty. I sat near the window, heels off, dress wrinkled. Jasper walked over with 2 glasses of water. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm not pretending anymore." He sat beside me. "You didn't have to do all that for me." I looked at him. "I didn't do it for you." He laughed a little. "Fair enough. But I'm glad you were there," I added. He nodded, the smallest smile tugging his mouth. The kind of smile that only comes from years of pain finally put to rest. We sat there for what felt like hours, watching the ocean, letting the silence settle not as a weight, but as release. The next morning, Victor's name trended on social media. The story spread faster than even Jasper expected. Respected developer Victor Marlowe exposed at anniversary party for decades-long deception, paternity cover-up, and potential involvement in fatal accident. Clips from the speech, screenshots of the letters, the black and white photo of James and baby Jasper. By 10 a.m., the Marlowe Foundation issued a vague no comment. By noon, the company suspended Victor indefinitely. Shareholders began requesting emergency meetings. Reporters circled the villa. I didn't open the gate. Instead, I poured myself coffee and turned off my phone. Victor never came home. His attorney sent a one-sentence email. Mr. Marlowe has entered a private wellness facility abroad and will not be making further statements. How convenient, just like me. But the world didn't stop. Neither did I. I went back to my studio 2 days later. Clay waited for no one. Clients still came. Some brought flowers. Others brought quiet stories of their own. One woman said I stayed quiet for 20 years. I think I'm done now. I nodded. Another whispered, "You said what we all wish we had the courage to say." I didn't smile. I just said thank you. Not out of pride, but because something in me had finally stopped bleeding. Jasper came by that weekend. He didn't say much, just handed me a drive. I backed everything up, in case you want to publish someday. I raised an eyebrow. Not for revenge, he said, but so someone like you doesn't stay quiet another 35 years. He looked at the shelf behind me, at the framed photo of James finally out in the open. "That's my father," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He smiled. Just a little, I already knew. Later that night, I sat at the workbench, holding the velvet box James gave me on my 23rd birthday. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved C+J. I'd never worn it. Now I slipped it on a chain around my neck. Let it rest near my heart. Victor built a legacy out of steel and silence, but James gave me something stronger, a son. A truth, a reason to stand back up. And I did. It's been 6 weeks since the night everything broke. Victor never returned to Santa Barbara. He officially resigned from the board, sold off his shares, and disappeared into whatever country lets men like him retreat. The press eventually moved on. A younger scandal took his place. They always do. But I stayed, not to clean up his mess, not to prove a point. Just to breathe again. Jasper comes by the studio every Sunday. Sometimes he brings fresh bread. Sometimes he brings silence. We've learned how to sit with each other, not as mother and son hiding from the past, but as survivors finally free from the weight of someone else's myth. He's thinking of moving back. Says he wants to open a small practice here. I told him I'd save a shelf for his law books in the back room. He smiled and said, "Only if I get free pottery lessons." Fair trade. Last weekend, I took down the last of the wedding photos. Not out of anger, not to erase the past, but to make room for new art, new stories, new truth. I didn't burn the photos. I just boxed them, gently labeled the version he wanted. People ask if I've forgiven Victor, and the truth is no, but I've released him. I don't need an apology. I don't need closure wrapped in guilt or grand gestures. What I needed was clarity, and I have that now. Forgiveness is for those who want peace between hearts, but clarity, that's what gives you peace inside your own. Have you ever uncovered a truth that changed everything? Would you have kept the secret or exposed it? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be more powerful than you think.